Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Coluccio, and you're listening to the Recruiting EQ podcast. Today's episode is episode number 96. Are resumes relevant? I had a character limit here, so it's probably going to be like, are resumes seriously even relevant anymore? Is probably what I wanted to say. And we have our special guest, Sean Grifith, founder of Truffle. Sean, how's it going?
Hey, excellent. Thanks so much for having me here, Rick.
My pleasure, Sean. Fellow Canadian I have on the show finally for once. Lots of Americans and Brits and Australians on this show often, but nice to have a fellow Canadian. And you are hailing from sunny or cloudy New Brunswick today, is that right?
Yeah, we'll have some sun sometime, I think, at this part of the world. Yeah, Moncton, New Brunswick. So it's a beautiful part of the country. A little rainy now, but looking for some better weather next week.
Awesome. Yeah, as a big music nerd as I am, Moncton I always think of very fondly as the birthplace of a lot of Canada's great 90s bands.
Yeah, absolutely. And we still get to enjoy them here now and then.
Yeah, for sure. Not the least of which is Eric Tripp and Rick White and those guys who are, I'm pretty sure,
Yeah.
Moncton royalty.
Yeah.
Sean, before we dive into this too hard, this resumes topic, can you please give our listeners just a little bit about yourself, what you do, and your background, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So, founder of Truffle, as you mentioned, Truffle is a candidate screening platform with some AI built in. Not the like creepy AI, but it's surfacing some great insights using some pretty powerful AI on the candidate screening platform. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go. Prior to this, I ran a text message marketing company. Was a very early employee and general manager and COO there. And then we were acquired actually twice over the course of a few years, which was really interesting. So I ended up working for a public company as COO of the SaaS division and then running their product strategy for a couple of years. So it's been a fun ride, sort of through that experience, startup through public company, and then back to sort of my roots of startup and now into the recruiting and hiring space.
Which is super exciting. One of the things we do often have on this show as guests are people who are founders of companies. Before we dive again too much into the resumes and candidate screening and assessment side of things, what was the decision-making process like for you? I mean, like you very rightly pointed out, you've had really run the gamut of different environments, including the big corporate acquisition and all that kind of thing. What prompted you to want to start a company and start Truffle now specifically or recently?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of sort of key things that happened. It was like a phenomenal amount of growth over the course of a few years. It was about 7 years in total from the time that I started with Simple Texting through to leaving Cinch. There's a big difference in being in sort of a startup world and being an entrepreneur and making decisions very quickly. And that's the environment that I think I thrive in most. And I think it was really interesting to experience, sort of big corporate world. But there was something in the end that didn't jive as well with me, or maybe I fell out of love with a little bit, which was, I want to have really large impact on the things that I'm doing. And I felt like it was just getting a little too difficult to do that. And, not to get like really ethereal or anything, but, I think that there's only so much life that you have to give, right? And I really wanted to make sure that I was giving the most that I could to something that I was really, really proud of. I sort of always had this entrepreneurial spirit. My parents were entrepreneurs from the time that I was very young. And so I feel like I hadn't quite climbed that mountain and made that achievement in the way that I wanted. And it was sort of the perfect time in my life. I had a young daughter who is now 9. I wanted to spend more time with her, and it just wasn't possible in that world. And so, what's this balance between doing something that's really important and that I felt like I had the expertise to be able to do, and sort of recommit to my family at the same time.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And of course, this show being recruiting EQ and focusing more on the human elements of things that have to do with the job market. I love the answer that it's like there's only so much life that you have to give, kind of thing. Like, just instead of being like, I am only motivated by money and titles and whatever. I think I hear more and more of that every day now, that people are trying to think a little bit about like not just maxing out on money and title
Yeah.
and all this kind of and responsibility, but like what does my life even look like, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I had done some of that, right, and I think I had learned those lessons through that period of time, right, and it was like a very particular moment. I mean, it happened over the course of a couple of months where I was sort of very deeply thinking about what my future looked like, and then there's this sort of one moment, right? I remember where I was traveling and sort of reflecting, and I thought, you know what, this is the time, this is the moment, and made the plunge.
That's awesome and good for you. A question for you as well that just occurred to me. A lot of the people that we've had on this show are staffing related startups. And not as much. There's been a couple of tech CEOs as well, but or founders, but mostly
Mhm.
staffing ones. And staffing founders tend to be salespeople at the core, so it's like a sales founder, like sales led founder kind of vibe to get it started.
Yeah.
But you're coming more from the COO led founder kind of thing, which I think is probably a different perspective and gives you different kind of like strengths and attributes in starting a small business. How do you feel about that difference? Is that something you've given some thought to or encountered?
Yeah, it's definitely something I've given some thought to,
I
right?
bet.
Is that, I, in my, longer ago past, sales was my thing, right? So
Right.
I have the sort of skill set to be able to do that. Is it my favorite thing to do? It's not, to be honest, it's not the thing that I love doing the most. And so oftentimes I do find myself reverting more to this, like how can we, um, this optimization and efficiency in how we run the organization. So, as an example, in the prior company, we implemented EOS, or the entrepreneurial operating system, and it was part of my role to do that. And so, founding this company from the very beginning, we set out with an operating system, and that's something that I don't know whether I would have done sort of previously, but as COO, something that I did, and I think was really, really beneficial in getting us rolling here, and helped to just run things a little tighter, right? Defining values in the beginning, and our goals, and how we have a regular cadence for meeting and reviewing. That's not to say that everything is a process, right? I think that we are very flexible, but I think it is something that I do today that I probably wouldn't have done in the past.
Yeah, I totally hear you on that. Like I'm a huge systems guy anyway. Even though
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah,
sales guy, I love having a good system and a clear process on how to use the system is so relaxing because you're not worried like, oh my God, I have to remember this thing or that thing and like staying up at night freaking out.
yeah, absolutely. It makes a difference.
It does. Okay, so resumes.
Yeah,
What a wild ride I have had in recruitment. I started recruitment pretty late in life, in my 30s, 13 years ago. So I was new to being on this side of it, right?
yeah,
In my 30s, after many years of being on the other side of it in sales jobs and stuff. And the past decade, especially, the discussion around what should go into a resume, who do you send your resume to, what should be in there, how should you structure it, do you put it online, do you send it to a lot
yeah.
of like the question and the answers have changed so drastically in the past decade that I feel like a lot of people don't even know anymore what to do. Are you feeling this too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was one of the reasons why we sort of founded Truffle, right? So a lot of it comes from my experience and the rest of the founders' experience, running this other company where we were growing really quickly. We went from 75 people at one point to about 125 people in the course of a couple of months. So you're growing very rapidly. And I remember there's one particular role that I was hiring for. It was our a director of operations, and I remember putting this job, and we were a remote company. So whenever you're hiring for a remote role, it's like 10,000 applications, and
Yeah.
how do you trust anything? And you're trying to go through some of these resumes, and you're like, what am I even looking for here? And so that was part of it. Like, how do you tell if somebody is good from a resume? Funny enough, um, during that phase, I had interviewed a ton of people, and the person that we actually ended up hiring did not come from our sort of standard source. It was somebody who had reached out via email and said, "Hey, I think I'm really great for this role," and so it was a sort of totally different tack, and that really caught
Interesting.
my attention. It ended up working out. And they're one of the best hires I've ever made, by the way. Right, so
Really?
it's pretty interesting. But that seemed more genuine than just trying to sort through resumes, right? Which was very difficult to tell. Who is good, who should I be having a secondary conversation with?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think so that's one piece of it, right? It's the resume itself.
Yep.
Then from a candidate perspective, I feel like there's grown to be a lot of cynicism about the job application process,
Yeah.
as in where should I be looking online to find real jobs? A lot of cynicism that a lot of job links postings they
Yeah.
feel on the internet are not real, because they often don't get a response, or they see them posted over and over again and never kind of being filled, possibly, or it's
Yeah.
unclear. And then there is just the idea of, like, the old job boards are not really what they used to be for some industries, like the Indeeds and the Workopolises anymore. Um, the application process seems to be a little, generally genuinely considered to be a little broken. I feel on both sides too, right? Like clients, like you're saying, a lot of them are like, I get 1,000 resumes and I got to go through all these 1,000 resumes and like 30 of them are relevant or something. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How is that
I think
been
you're
a factor?
totally. I think you're totally. I totally agree. Right? Is that it's broken on both sides, right? So there's sort of maybe three things in there. One is easy apply. This idea of easy
Right.
apply, right? I think really has done a disservice to the application process, and it's one of the things that has led to a lot of the sort of cynicism on job applications, right? You can put a job post up, and with one click, you can apply, right? And from the candidate side, it might feel easy, but if everything sort of goes to a void and you rarely hear back, right? The incentive is very difficult there. And then from the employer side, through this easy apply, it's also you're inundated with a million resumes, and it
Yep.
becomes even more difficult to sift through it, right? Which leads to maybe a bit of apathy on the candidate's part. It's sort of feeding back, right, in a negative way, that candidates just don't hear back on any roles because it's only the top 5, 10 people who ever hear back. So that's one problem. And I think I say easy apply, but it really is any of these sort of like really easy application processes. There's a lot of them. So that's part of it. And the other part is, sort of the investment, on the candidate side in the application itself. You can go and you can tweak up your resume to look perfect for anything. But, in a lot of cases, it's not real. And so that's a challenge. And then on the employer side, when you're posting on, I think the thought process to the application or the screening process generally really matters. And controversially, maybe a little bit of friction during that application process where candidates have to think about what it is that they're applying for, and some investment from the employer side on how they're bringing candidates into that funnel can make a really big difference. And I think oftentimes it doesn't exist today.
Yeah, and I mean that there's so many interesting points in there, right? Because I feel like the people want to stand out, but they also want to put in all the right things they need to put in. Like there's still sort of this lingering sense of it needs to be SEO optimized, basically, right?
Yeah.
It's got to have certain keywords in
Yeah.
order to be found when it's submitted electronically. But I mean, now that we're in an LLM sort of driven world, and I don't know a ton of this, but I have heard certainly that
Yeah.
keyword optimization is actually not even the way that a lot of search works online any longer. And it's more like long form sentences that it infers, yeah, this is a good match.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that at all in terms of how do you feel about that trope versus the reality now?
Yeah, I think keywords, I think, are probably dead. I mean, they're going to continue to exist in a lot of ATSs, right? In the way that you lead it, but are they worthwhile, right? When so many people are optimizing for those keywords, you're getting a really high pass rate, and you're still going to have to sort through those, right? So how do you look for better evidence on a resume that says that somebody is qualified? And I think that's the sort of tack that we've taken, is that we're not looking just at keywords. So we do have a resume module, which is actually launching in about a week's time, which
Nice.
will allow you to sort through resumes, right? And so what we're looking for is, companies can define criteria on a resume that they're looking for, and then we're looking for more substantive evidence on a resume to say that the individual, the criteria is matched, or that there's signal there that they have actually done the work, right?
Mhm.
Not just a simple keyword match. And I think that ideally that leads to a much more powerful, sort of next level above the keyword search. So that's, I think, how we're looking at it. And I think largely how, if anybody is using LLMs on keyword matching and ranking and those sort of things, that's how they are likely doing it.
So how does that work just high level? Like if you were to summarize sort of what people should think of, is it specific detail around what they've done that helps qualify that they've or legitimize that they've actually done it versus more generalities, or like what are the factors that help someone's resume get found in this case?
Yeah. So what it's looking for, so basically you would set out some criteria, right? So you could say something like, let's take a marketing, somebody in marketing, for
Sure.
example. So you could be looking for things like SEO experience, right? And how would you tell that somebody has SEO experience, right? Have they worked somewhere, that has done SEO? What sort of proof? Have they written content? Have they optimized campaigns? And so what you're doing is you're looking through a resume and you're looking for all of the points that would indicate that somebody has actually done this work.
Right.
And then you're saying, great, they're really strong at these things. And here's a piece of evidence that shows on their resume that, they've done it, or maybe they just have some experience here, but it doesn't look like it's really strong evidence. And, or, they clearly don't have that. And then you can sort of say, hey, here are the criteria that we're looking for in a high performing individual. And then we can surface that, right, in a sort of resume matching that goes beyond just looking at SEO, right, this sort of traditional keyword match, which I think is a bit false.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think that there's another fear nowadays more than ever around legitimacy because people are able to use ChatGPT or God knows what sort of AI tool, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexify or whatever it is, Perplexity, to build a resume for them that sounds more convincing.
Yeah.
Like, this is maybe going to sound like a crazy question that no one can answer. So tell me if this is nuts. But like,
Yeah.
is AI good at telling when AI wrote something versus yet, or are we not there yet? Like, you know what I mean? Can it tell, hey, this is probably not a human yet, or are we not in that era?
I would say that the confidence level varies, right? So
Right.
is it good at telling? I think it is pretty good at telling whether something is sort of AI generated. There are some pretty easy tells. Right?
Sure.
Now, people are getting much better at sort of circumventing some of those tells, so that way it becomes more and more difficult. And so I think what we are not sort of flagging AI generation at this point, right? Because
right, I see.
To do that, I think you want to be really confident. And also in some cases it might be okay, right? Some organizations might be okay with looking at an AI generated resume, right? If they can then downstream validate that the person has these qualifications. If they just used it for polish, that's one thing, right? If they used it to fabricate a story, that's a totally different thing, right? So that requires a different sort of some different evidence there. So what I would say is it can detect it. It can detect it with different levels of confidence, right? You could outright flag something that is, has certain, blatant AI signals and say, yep, absolutely, this was. In other cases, it's a little bit more questionable. And so you could flag it saying, medium confidence on this. And here's why, it's repeating patterns that AI often does. It uses AI jargon. It's using symbols or characters that AI, right? Those ones are pretty easy tells.
The symbols or characters thing is, I think, was the earliest one that I can remember anyway, that people were clocking. And so
when you see all those M dashes on a resume, you're kind of going, yes, right? This is ChatGPT, isn't it?
Yeah, but so that's the thing, is it's already become obvious enough that I think a lot of people are making sure that that's not the case.
Find and replace M dashes with a dash, right? And you're like,
for example. And anybody who's not doing that, there you go. That's the fix.
That's
just
right.
Tell it to fix it. Okay, so let's then talk a little bit about Truffle. Obviously, you've spoken a bit about it just peripherally here, but it'd be good to just get a sense of like how it works and what is, in your words, the value proposition of Truffle as one of these services.
Yeah. So going back to sort of the reason for being, right, was there's I think a couple of changes, in the market and the industry, which have led to, either way too many applications, or how do you tell if someone is real? And you and I were talking for a few minutes, right, just about this compression, where it feels like, a lot of folks are working longer days and maybe
Yeah.
not, getting as far ahead as they would like. There's more administrative work in a lot of cases. And so we took a look at that and said, is there an opportunity in the market to help recruiters, right? We had felt this pain ourselves as we were going through, and we could not find a solution to this problem that was reasonable, right? We tested ATS and some of the filters there, and it just wasn't good enough. And even if you could get it to, sort through some resumes, it wasn't sort of enough to make the difference that we wanted. And also, if you look at just resumes, there's not enough signal there. So how do you move beyond just resumes? And the way that Truffle actually started was in a one-way video interview, which is still a big part of the platform today. But then, we sort of expanded out and included some assessments, and now adding resumes to get a sort of complete flow. And the idea here is not that everyone uses every component in the candidate screening platform.
Right.
It's very much that we want to give recruiters, staffing agencies, anybody hiring, the ability to use the tools in the platform to create a screening flow that works for a particular role, right? So as an example, I was speaking with a customer the other day, and it was for a remote customer success role, right? And for them, the biggest leverage was the one-way video interview, right? It's like they really needed to, just see how somebody communicates and what does that look like. And so they were able to invite, 100 people to complete a one-way video interview, right? Which we then score and match to the job description and a custom intake. And that gives them good signal on, okay, who should they have a next conversation with? It's never replacing sort of human decision here.
Right.
The goal is always, how can we provide more signal on the candidates to say, where should the conversation go next? And where should you invest the most time? So that way you can make ideally better hires in the end.
So oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's the core of it.
No, and I love the idea of the one-way video interview. I was hearing about people trying to do this even like a decade ago, and it quickly disappeared in popularity. But this was pre-COVID, and now I think I have to assume that the number of remote positions, the kind of occasional scandals we've heard about in the news of people fraudulently pretending to be one person and not being that person because of remote work and so on, particularly in like government roles, was a whole thing that now like there's a lot more going into trying to make sure that people are legitimately who they claim to be when they apply to these jobs. So I can imagine a world where the one-way video interview, I would say your timing is good, because I can imagine this growing in popularity to the point where it might even become the norm. Is that what you guys are figuring on as well? That this becomes something that's mandatory almost?
That's a part of it, absolutely, right? So our thinking was that we're at the beginning of a curve, right, which will take off. So I want to be clear on the one-way video interview. Maybe while we talk about it for a second here, it's like, it is not, it's not the uncanny valley, like, AI interviewer here, right? That's not what we're doing. We don't think that's ready for prime time. This is very much, a question is posed and you answer in video. And then what we're doing is we're taking that transcript and we're matching it against the job description and a custom intake to help give you some better insights on the candidate, right? And I think that part of the previous reason why it didn't take off was, even that wasn't really ready for prime time, right? It didn't work for a lot of candidates. Everybody's using different browsers and devices, and it's really difficult to do that, right? I think today's world, that's something that we've spent a lot of time on to make sure that the candidate experience itself is very good. It's very easy for candidates to do. And so I think that absolutely helps. To your point about, is this going to become the norm? I think in a lot of roles, it will become, right? More normal, certainly, to see this as part of the process. And I think, we have to look at it, and the way that we look at it is it's not right for every single role, right?
Sure.
And so this is where I think having that nuance around what does the flow look like depending on the position is really, really important. And so I think for a lot of roles, it will become part of that process so you can get the signal you need to know who it is that you should invest more time with.
No, 100%. And I think yeah, you're totally right to bring up those factors. And I think you guys offering a service where it facilitates doing the video,
Yeah.
people are better at doing video now than they were like, 10 years ago by far,
Yeah.
post COVID.
Yeah.
B, facilitating that from a compatibility standpoint is huge. But I
Yeah.
think one of the biggest things is that so the companies that I know that did this pre-COVID, I know maybe 10 years is saying a lot, but like 8 years ago kind of thing, like
Yeah.
toward 2020, there was no accurate transcription voice to
Yeah.
text really that you could rely on. So people weren't getting weeded out. So now
That's right.
suddenly you're like, oh, we had this brilliant idea to have one-way interviews where people are answering questions. Now we've got to watch 5 to
Yeah.
10 minute videos for all 100 applicants if we want to. So it actually increased the time drastically. Whereas
Yeah.
if you could now assess down on that like custom intake, I definitely see a value in saying, okay, we'll spend a bit more time on each candidate, but that they'll be more relevant, and we won't spend time looking through a ton of resumes that aren't even remotely relevant at all, kind of thing.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding correctly.
100%. Yeah, you nailed that one, right? So I think that was definitely part of the prior generation here, right? It's like if you actually have to watch all of the videos,
Yeah,
you might as well just arrange the calls and get on the call with the
exactly.
candidate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's totally fine. Now with Truffle, right, transcription is very good, right? The matching process with candidates, I think, is really excellent that we're doing today. And so, when you see the results and you see, that 50 people have completed, and you see, the sort of high scoring, mid score, low score, and you start watching some of those, right? And we even have this thing called, it's a candidate highlight, right, which sort of compresses every candidate into a 30-second, little clip, which allows you to get a sense of the candidate and some AI reasoning around why each clip was chosen. That's really interesting, right?
yeah,
And so
definitely.
now you can say, great, I'm getting enough signal to know that this person is clearly just not a fit, right? And in 30 seconds, you can move on from that candidate. And you've gotten more signal than you would have in a lot of cases from the back and forth of arranging a call and getting on the call with somebody and sort of spending 30 minutes on that process. And that's, I think, a big part of the why we exist.
Yeah, there was an interesting debate that we got into at my prior agency when we were talking about because we're dealing with a lot of people who were French speakers, but who were recent arrivals to Canada.
Mhm.
And obviously there's when you're talking about recent arrivals, it's sticky territory when you're from an
Yeah,
HR perspective because there's biases that people have and so on. So it's a hard water to navigate because obviously someone needs to possess the basic skills needed in the job, which might be
yeah,
communication skills. So example, maybe their English is not good enough, but they speak French fluently or whatever, and that's a requirement. But there was a lot of talk around, people coming from other countries would put their photo on the resume because that's common there.
yeah,
And the whole idea was, well, no, the resume should be assessed without seeing the person to eliminate bias, was the
yeah,
argument that I was always told a long while ago. I have seen nothing but the opposite to be true. That's why I like that you're talking about a video assessment because when you see a human being, see and hear
yeah,
them, there's a lot more nuance to it than just seeing their name and their experience. I actually feel like the bias works against a lot of people. Not calling anyone out here for racism exactly, but in terms
yeah,
of their imagined language skills, right?
yeah,
Versus the reality. It's often surprising when you actually meet someone. So if there's a way to sort of put more human nuance to it, I actually feel that it would help eliminate biases. But that's just in my head. Do you
yeah.
have how do you feel about the whole bias situation when you're talking about seeing someone visually in an application process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important call out, Rick, is that, bias is real and it's something that, we think about a lot, right? We have actually spent,
I bet.
you know, more time on thinking about bias over the last few months than I ever thought I would, right?
Right.
And so, we do a lot to sort of try and control for that. I think there's a hot conversation around bias in AI and how AI sort of perceives
Yeah.
these things. So a few things that we do specifically, resumes are stripped, right? So no PII, we remove names and everything that we can. So that way, as it's processed, it's not, we're trying to eliminate as much potential bias as possible on the resume side, right?
Awesome.
So, I mean, that's interesting in itself. On the video side, we are not actually, when we process the AI on the video side, we're only processing the transcript. So we are
Yeah.
not processing the video itself, right? So the AI is never seeing that video. Again, trying to control for some of that bias. That said, I think, when it comes to a recruiter actually watching a video, I think that there is something really important there, that you can assess communication skills for a role where communication is really important, right? And so I think, it becomes up to the recruiter at that point to, make sense of the situation and make the right call, right? And hopefully they've had the sort of bias training necessary to make those decisions.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Hopefully they have, and hopefully they're
Hopefully
just
they
kind of
have.
like,
Hopefully they have, right?
hopefully they've had bias training and they're just kind of like a decent person who doesn't want to,
Yeah, make smart choices,
Yeah.
right? So I think is a lot of what it boils down to.
fair, ethical, smart choices kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
That's the hope. But no, I do really like the human element of that, because I do
Yeah.
think that it brings, again, just to bring it back to the ethos of this whole show, is I think that the AI and optimization conversation of how it's changing not just the job search, but jobs at all in the world, is a great opportunity to take a more human perspective here and talk about the human elements. And this is interestingly a very tech heavy way of automating a bunch of process that actually gets a lot more human to human information, which I'm personally in favor of.
Yeah, I agree, right? I mean, if you look at it as sort of the very first version of Truffle, right? We didn't have any resume screening, and it was all one-way video interview. And we saw some customers that use it this way, right? Which is, they do an initial round of resume screen, and then they're inviting 100 people to the next round of one-way video interview, which is something that you would never have time to do, right? If you were trying to get on a first round interview with all of these people. And what that does is actually it widens the net of opportunity for those candidates. And oftentimes what we see, and this is something that was really important to us, is that you sometimes come across a diamond in the rough, right? Somebody who you may not have sort of had that secondary conversation with, but turns out to be a really incredible candidate. And that's one of the things that I think Truffle is really good at, and it gives those people a really nice opportunity when they may not have had it in the past.
So now here's a question for you too. I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, that a lot of your clientele would be TA departments, HR departments for brands, and not so much consulting firms or recruiting agencies. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And that was by design, right? So, we do work with some TA agencies, and that's also really interesting. But the goal was, there are some platforms that exist today that do a lot of what we do, but they're very expensive, right? You're talking $30,000, $40,000 a year, and for a small business who maybe has, 2 or 3 folks in their TA department, I mean, they're just not going to afford something like that, right? They don't have the capability, and they're drowning at this point, right? And that's one of the things that we get very regularly as we're talking with prospects. It's like, we are absolutely drowning in applications, and we don't have time. We're not getting to candidates, right? It's like, how can we create some more efficiency? And so our experience running the last business that I ran, which we worked with 18,000 small businesses effectively across the US and Canada. And so we had this really deep experience working with small businesses, and knew that the market was sort of underserved for a platform that could do it. And so, our sort of the ethos for us was like, can we do it in a way that makes it accessible to really small TA teams, that we could give them a tool that's really powerful and help them feel a little bit more sane in their roles by taking away some of those things that can be automated.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, I mean, everybody, it's crazy how everybody is inundated. That's the thing, is that it's not just big companies that are getting 500, 1,000 applicants. It's everybody.
Yeah, as I'm seeing candidates sort of rolling in for some of the roles that the companies that we work with have open. I mean, I couldn't imagine being in the TA department trying to sort through some of these applications. It would be unbelievable, right? And I've had that. One role that we posted previously, it was like 4,500 applications, and like, how could you ever do anything with 4,500 applications?
Unless you have a giant team. Yeah, exactly. You would need an army of people looking at resumes all the time to deal with that. And how, so from just a logistics perspective, when these candidates record their one-way interviews and that data is assessed, it's attached to a certain job, right? Because there's the specific criteria that it's measuring against. But then that information, does that information stay with the employer? Does it stay with Truffle? Let's say that job, that requisition is closed. What happens then?
Yeah, it saves with the employer, right? So they retain access to it, right? There's a retention period, right, where they can continue to retain access to that. But it stays only with that employer, right? So we're not using that information anywhere else. Clearly something that's really important in the industry.
Yeah. So it feels like this is marching away from, in a good way, marching away from some of the advice that I hear people are getting who are applying. So I'll give you some examples. Everyone that I know knows that I've been working in recruitment for, over a decade, and they know that I recruit recruiters, so it's different, but like people in
Yep.
tech in particular will ask me for advice. They'll be like,
Yep.
what do you think I should do? Because that's this person said, or that site, or this resource, or this influencer says, make sure that you apply to minimum 250 places or whatever when you're on a job search. And I'm just kind of like, I can't imagine a world where an influencer has now influenced 10,000 people,
Yeah.
50,000 people, a million people to send 250 applications when they're looking for a job. I can't imagine a world where that makes sense. And that is the world we're in right now. Like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? I think it is counter to how I think about it. And one of my hopes, right, is that on both sides we can become more thoughtful about the application itself, right? So from the candidate side, and then really thoughtful about how we're screening candidates.
Yeah.
I think that would be sort of an ideal world for me. And hopefully Truffle slots in there somewhere. But if not, right? If not, I think that there's a few things that are so key, right? One of the things that we spent a lot of time with in the past and really think about today is aligning on exactly what you want in a role, right? Really being very thoughtful upfront about that. And we would go through sort of like several revisions and refinements of what does that look like? And what should the steps be for this particular role? Who should you be speaking to in an organization? How much weight do you put on a resume versus an initial screening conversation? Are we assessing this in some standardized way, right? And not just sort of the gut feel. And I think in smaller businesses, I think that can be, especially if there isn't a large TA team or maybe no TA team at all, founders are hiring, right? People haven't been trained to hire in a lot of cases. And
Yeah.
so, we can provide maybe a little bit more structure around what that looks like and help to build like a beautiful flow that is engaging to candidates, right? And producing really great results for employers.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then from a candidate perspective, I think that right now the cynicism out there is such that I feel that candidates are trying to shy away from any application process that isn't simple.
Yeah,
But I typically advise them that it's literally the opposite, right? If it's a
that's
simple
right.
application process, you're now up against 1,000 people, and they're going to pick. But I mean, who can do a thorough analysis of 1,000 resumes in a
Yeah,
timely fashion? Like it's not sustainable. So your chances are lower of having a meaningful impact if it's an easy application process.
yeah,
But at the same time, candidates would also have to be pretty selective if they choose 10, 20 instead of 250.
for
Uh,
sure.
but I would say that a process like this, if they come across something where they're being asked to do one-way video questions, I think is a very good sign.
I would totally agree. Absolutely. Right. So I think the right amount of fiction, what we're not saying is put so many barriers that like nobody's going to get through the
Sure.
gauntlet. I think that you're just reducing your chances of like a good candidates doing. But a little bit of friction can be sort of a natural filter, right? It's like people who I think, candidates, right? If you're listening, right, run to it. If there's the right amount of friction in the beginning. If they're asking a couple of qualification questions up front, that's important, right? At the very least, it's a small filter. If you're getting invited to do a one-way video interview for the most part, it means that you've been selected in the next step of the process, right? And that has been thoughtful in there, and that it is important.
Yep, for sure. This plays into something that I have been saying for a while and that I think is true, and I get some pushback on it, but mostly I don't. And I'm curious your thoughts as well. But I feel like everyone in today's job market needs to think a little bit about personal branding
Yep.
and like how they present themselves and their ability to do video content. And video content doesn't necessarily mean Instagram influencer Kim Kardashian stuff.
Yeah.
It's much more professionally, like, there's a lot more to it than that. But I think to be able to find this balance where you can be yourself a little bit and not hide behind generic
Yeah.
keywords, for example, or whatever else. I think that the in Canada, I feel especially that it's less, I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but less competitive than the US for in general, just because there's fewer people. So I think that there's, in Canada, certainly there's a bit of like yeah, if I have decent experience and my resume has the right keywords on it, I'm going to get this job. I show up and I show up on
Yeah.
time. Do you feel that too, though, that now we're entering into an era that it doesn't matter what your job is, you kind of need to think a little bit about your personal brand to get a job
Yeah.
and maintain it?
Absolutely. Right. I think standing out is important, right? And how can you stand out? That can mean different things to different people, absolutely, right? But find the thing that makes you you, and find how you communicate that, right? Whether that be in the resume or a video interview or however you're doing it. And I think a big part of this is everybody has great stories, right?
Right.
And I think people should spend a lot of time thinking about those stories and how they communicate those stories, right? And communicating in video is a great way of doing it. And I know that the candidates who are generally most successful, getting with Truffle, right, and getting through and getting hired, right, they're really good at communicating those stories. I think that you probably appreciate this as a recruiter, I imagine, right? In that, a one-line answer to a question is never going to be good enough. But if you can back it up with, an example, a story, right? It becomes so much more real and concrete. And it certainly helps candidates stand out. It's something I always look for, when I'm recruiting, right? It's like back it up with that evidence, and it doesn't always need to be that you conquered the mountain. A struggle is really interesting as well, right? So I think that that's something that I would absolutely encourage people to reflect on a little bit as they're building their personal brands.
I think that's an amazing piece of advice, especially the struggle counts as well. I think that there is increasingly a desire to sort of hack the system somehow and
Yeah,
just put the right words on and hide behind that in a way in order to just get a job and be as put as little of your real self into it as possible. And I think it's totally untrue. I think that's part of what's not working and
yeah,
broken about the process. I think it's exactly the opposite, like you said too. Being able to show vulnerability and discuss things you've struggled with and how you've handled those things is right now super novel and
yeah,
definitely a differentiator. But I think that there is also, and again, this is going to get into the bias thing. There's a stigma too around from older aged hiring managers in particular toward younger applicants, maybe in their mid 20s, and the Gen Z. Gen Alpha is still a little too new for me to have a lot to
yeah.
say about them in my field because I'm not doing jobs where 18-year-olds are getting hired. But
Right.
but for Gen Z people in general, there's these stigma against them too that they don't possess resilience and that they are too soft and they're always talking about mental health and they don't have any kind of grit is a word that comes
Yeah,
up a lot, right? But again, the ability to show vulnerability and talk about
yeah,
struggle and discuss how you dealt with that situation would be a huge attribute right now.
yeah. Big time. I think I think back to some of the criteria that we had as we were hiring, at very high volume, and for some really key roles in the past. It was always something I looked for, right? Is there's a few things that we generally looked for that we saw, like it's some sort of entrepreneurial spirit, right?
Mhm.
Depending on the role, of course, right, was always very important. But how people handled struggle and challenges and what they learned through those things. Personally, it's something that I have always tried to communicate. I've had a lot of success, but I've also had some pretty large failures, right? But I have learned more through those failures, right? And if you could communicate, how you took that struggle, right, and turned it into a learning opportunity, and how you then and then how you translated that into the next role. I think it's one of the most powerful stories you can tell.
Yeah, for sure. For years I was hiding the fact that I dropped out of college, and I dropped out of college to start a record label with my best friend, and we were in bands and started a record label. And then that record label obviously did, spoiler alert, I didn't become a rock star record label owner, right? But at the time I was like hiding these facts and relying on my day jobs. when I got this recruiting job, I was brutally honest and I told them what had happened. And they ended up asking me questions about like what we did, what our successes were, what did we try, and whatever. And I think that's honestly one of the things that convinced them most to hire me in a pivotal job change than anything, right?
Yeah.
Like than anything else that I did.
You can translate that right into so many different roles, right? It's just that ability to think really critically, to self-reflect, and I think it's really important.
Awesome. Okay, so then how are you guys feeling about this? Is it's a big question time. As a
Yeah.
lot of people who listen to this podcast will know, usually I go hard on the AI questions and the human element questions toward the end, and somehow we're already getting there. But how do you feel about where AI fits into the picture, not only for
Yeah.
yourselves, but just in general in the workforce?
Yeah. Look, it's not going anywhere, that's for sure,
That's
right?
for
And
sure.
it's going to become more and more important in time. Can I say exactly where AI is going? Absolutely not. But what I
Sure.
can say is that it it provides so much advantage today that just going out and spending the $20 a month on something, it doesn't really matter what it is, but taking advantage of the sort of newest frontier models that are out there and starting to use it for things. A really good example. So my mom, right? She was using ChatGPT very lightly, and I was like, "Look, mom, you've got to go and you've got to, just pay the $20 a month and start using it." And she was doing some home renovations, and now I can't get her to stop talking about it because she's like, she's been like AI pilled, right? And she's like, seeing what it can do, um, and that's really interesting, right? Is it good at everything? No, but learning what it is good at it and what it's not, where you can use it, where you can get advantage. And I think the thing that you have to that is really important for people to realize, right, is that it's not going to solve all of your problems, right? But
Right.
if you have to look at it as a tool, and how can that tool help to create some efficiency in what you're doing on it, or how can you offload some of the things that you're doing on a daily basis, right, that you don't need to be doing anymore, can free up some time so that you can reinvest that time, right, or entirely free up that time if you are working 12 hours a day,
Yeah.
right, to reinvest in yourself. And I think that's how we think about it. We at Truffle, we are sort of like totally on the AI train, right? Not only are we using it in the platform, right, but we are coding with AI today, and we are using it in support and in so many different areas of the business. But we're really intentional about that, which is one of our sort of core values. Is it doesn't get used everywhere,
Yeah.
and so you have to be really thoughtful about where does it give you advantage and where could it cause harm. We think, for example, we have a sort of front end bot that helps with support, but humans giving support is still really important, right? And I don't think we've solved that problem yet, nor do I think we will ever. I think that's something that's really important. We're still talking with our customers very regularly, right? Because human connection and building those human relationships, right? You can't just have AI send an email and say, "What do you think of the platform?" Right? You're going to get absolutely no response, right? So how can we continue to interact with our customers in a meaningful way? Is really, really critical.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying because it's a very sort of humanist outlook, right? And we talked about this briefly the first time we talked, and even just earlier today. Um, that this is a really cool opportunity to ask questions like this, right? And to see
Yeah.
like where do we believe that it's important for human beings to interact with each other? Where do we think that that has value on either side of the fence as a service you're offering, or as a customer, or as an employer, or as an employee, or all the different angles that it comes into. It's a great way to have those conversations. Like you very quickly said out of the gate that your one-way video is not an AI agent who's conducting the video. It's a one-way interview, and it's not like there's no avatar of
Yeah.
a person being like, "Hello, I'm Truffle Man, and
The
I'm here to
creepiest
introduce."
thing, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that that's an interesting choice for a company like yours, that I feel is what puts the human forward in your case and uses AI to automate around it. Like, I talked to one candidate a while ago in Texas who was saying that she worked for Indeed, had like a mini agency that globally that was doing light industrial, just like shift work, like low level
Okay. Yeah.
positions. And there was, I don't know, a couple hundred probably recruiters doing that globally, and there were 50 just in Texas. I believe 50 is the number. Don't quote me on that, but a bunch of them, and they let everybody go globally the same day, and they put an AI avatar in their place, cold like this. There was no warning, and it's almost like they're beta
Unbelievable.
testing it. It's not
Yeah.
a criticism of Indeed. They're
Sure.
trying to make it profitable. I understand that, but
Yeah.
like at what expense, right? Like
That's right.
it's just fascinating, and I'm glad to hear that you guys didn't think, okay, well, we'll automate that too.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I really think about AI as like my greatest thinking partner for the most part, right? Where I'm handing off tasks, right, to an agent today that maybe I'm just not really great at, or it's not the best use of my skill, or using it to ideate, right, in ways that I wouldn't have been able to before. But in a lot of ways, I find myself mentally, right, I'm having to be more strategic now because I can do more, right, than I was able to in the past. And I think that's also a really key piece of balance here is that you do feel like you have these superpowers sometimes, and I find myself sitting at my computer for far longer than I should by times, right, because you sort of get down these rabbit holes. It's really important to say, okay, I can do all of these things, right, but it doesn't mean that I should or I need to.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And at Raymond George, right, we're actually going through a big exercise right now to try different AI. We have an AI coach, and it's because it's a question that comes up a lot from our clients too, right? Is
Yeah,
what systems people use and what are we seeing in terms of what works and what doesn't, and where to insert this, like those kinds of automations into
yeah,
the chain of whatever you're doing. But it's amazing. I think it's amazing that no one knows the answer to that question. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? Like we can either you participate in in the whole thing, like you're saying, pay the $20, give it a try. At least then
yeah,
we're all part of the journey together, and that actually will affect the results if people
yeah.
all jump on board and try
Yeah,
together.
very much. I think that AI skepticism, I think that one of the things that we come back to is that I think there is fear, right, around AI, right? Is it going to take my job, right? Or, is it going to make mistakes? I think the best thing that most folks could do at this point is just to learn about it, learn how you can use it, right? How it can accelerate what you're doing. And I think that that's where the opportunity lies today. And sort of like jumping 2 feet in is probably the best advice I could give for now. Put yourself at the bleeding edge of it, right? And I think that that'll give you the biggest advantage.
That is awesome. Okay, so how would people best get in touch with you, Sean, if they are interested in looking into Truffle for their hiring process?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website is probably the easiest place. It's hiretruffle.com. Totally open to speaking with people myself, right? So it's Sean at hiretruffle.com. Reach out to me. Happy to partner up with somebody on the team. We're just open to a great conversation, right, around recruiting and how Truffle could help.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll put that link in the comments here. If you're not listening to this on LinkedIn and it's going live, you can feel free to find Sean Grifith on LinkedIn as well. And if you're listening to this after the fact, you can find Recruiting EQ on anywhere you get your podcasts, really. In fact, if you can't find it where you get your podcasts, DM me and I will fix that for you and get you Recruiting EQ. Well, thank you very much, Sean. It's been a pleasure having you on, and already somehow the time has flown. But I
I don't know
will
where the last hour has gone. It's
yeah,
amazing.
I know. It's been a great conversation. Love to stay in touch. And by all means, guys, try Truffle.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Rick.
Thanks.